because I've never done anything like this before, and this is my first attempt at using PowerPoint, so anything can happen. So be kind and don't throw your beer bottles at them. Okay, well, are we on that screen? Yes, I got that one right then. That was the hello and welcome screen. I'm Heather. I have worked in the games industry for 15 years, but I'm better known really for my work on Tomb Raider 1 and Tomb Raider 2. So I'm going to give you a little insights into how I got there and how I got a job in game design in the first place, which tends to be the most asked question. There I am, I think. I have my invisibility cloak. There I am. So yeah, I came out of school, and I actually studied to be a nursery nurse, so I did my NNEB. I'd always had a keen interest in art. I obviously grew up in a time when we didn't have a smartphone, and the only thing that your parents bought you at Christmas was a colouring book and a packet of felt tip pens. So spent most of my time drawing and sketching. And over the 3-year period that I was in London, I realised that I'd made a terrible career choice and decided to come back to the Midlands and follow a career in art and design. Which was when I saw an advertisement, believe it or not, in a newspaper. And that's how we used to get jobs in those days, or from a local job centre. And as you can see, this was a very appealing advertisement because not only did it say that any applicants should have an interest in computer games, but also illustration and animation, which was something I was very keen on. So I went to Rare for an interview and went armed with all sorts of very bizarre demons, dragons, strange ideas for comics and journals. But the night before the interview, I actually thought to myself, well, what do these people really need? And we were only just coming out of the ZX Spectrum days, so I nipped to my local newsagent, picked up some graph paper, did 3 or 4 characters, stuck it on the back of the portfolio, and this is actually what got me the job at Rare. As I say, those were the days when you could get a job based on drawings and a portfolio, because there really wasn't anywhere to study game design. So during my 5 years at Rare, I worked on approximately 10 titles, some of them as the main level designer and some of them as a support artist. I'll just run through a few slides of those games, so any of you that are into retro gaming might recognise them. But as you can see, they were predominantly 8-bit, 16-bit games. We did our very best to create a 3D environment, but obviously you were constrained, you were restricted by the limitations of the system. Actually, one of those games, the Glove Ball game, was intended to be used with an attachment, a glove attachment, which picked up on your hand movements and finger movements. So it was the very, very early days of VR. My last 2 projects were coin-op games at Rare, but again, they focused predominantly on 2D beat-em-ups. So after 5 years of working on that and finally being made redundant, I was quite pleased to see the back of it. But, sorry, I'm going to actually show you now. This might interest some of, again, the people who are interested in how we did 8-bit graphics in the day. So there's a one remaining, I think, slide from my time at Rare that I had to dig out from my attic. And what we had to do with these graphics essentially was is decode the graphic before it arrived at the programmer's desk. So we do a sketch of a character, and in this case a dinosaur. We plot it out, we put it onto a light box, which you'll be familiar with if you work in architect design. The light box had a grid on it. We placed the drawing on top of the grid, and then we placed some paper on top of the drawing, and then we plotted out roughly the character shape, shading, highlights, animation frames, and then had the tedious test of actually decoding that in binary. So as you can see, hexadecimal character plots there, all 8 by 8 pixels, and each one of those character blocks then was decoded into binary. But you'll be relieved I am not going to give you a crash course on how to decode in binary. You can find out on the internet if you really want to know. So for the next slide, I thought I'd tell you that I was very sad when I left there. They'd introduced me into the industry for a start, so I was very grateful for that. And although I think we both sort of had the best of our times with each other, it was time to move on. And that didn't take long really, because within a few weeks I'd been hired by Core Design in Derby. So I thought you'd want to see what core design looked like when I started, which was a whole heap of really bad jumpers and hairstyles. I'd say eight or 9 of the people in the picture were executives, and I think there'd probably been about 4 dev teams there, along with our games testers and accountants. It was pretty much everybody get down to the car park because we're doing a company photograph. I think the cleaner might even be there, I'm not sure. So we're moving on to my first game at Core, and this game would have been on the Sega Saturn, which was Skeleton Crew, and it very much suited my style. And I was working alongside a guy called David Ryman at the time, who's predominantly a fine artist, used to supply a lot of work for comic journals. He actually did the cover box for this game. I focused mostly on the maps, isometric maps. It's 22.5-degree landscape maps. But it was a nice game to start with, and it wasn't so far removed from what I'd been doing at Rare. With a few additions that you could get behind certain objects, so it wasn't a pure 2D platformer, but it still had its restrictions. It wasn't long after I'd finished on that project that I found myself wondering who wanted me next, because at Core it was very much a situation where if you left a team, you were hoping that another team in the company would welcome you on board. Toby Gard and Paul Douglas actually were another 2 guys that had just finished BC Racers. So the 3 of us were at loose ends, and I joined them. It was literally a matter of, Toby, can I come in and sit with you? And I looked at some of the artwork that he created for Tomb Raider and couldn't wait to help design the game with him. So this is a picture, it's the only picture I think that exists of us all at the end of the development of the game, so we're all looking pretty tired. So we've got from left to right there, you've got Gavin Rummery, Jason Gosling, Toby Gard, myself in the middle, obviously. Neil Boyd, now I could have said me on the end with a baseball hat, but that was Paul Douglas. I'm going to give you a little insight now into how we'd moved on from that isometric game the year before, which was still very simple, pixelated graphics, to where we were a year later, and that was the Tomb Raider that you all sort of know now, really, the beginning of it. And it was an amazing game to work with, not just because of the game itself, but because of the technology behind it. We got on board 2 amazing programmers, and that was Gavin Rummery and Paul Douglas. who made specific engines for the artists to work with on the game. And that had never been done before. We had an engine that was the room editor that we could create rooms in on the fly instantaneously. And I think some of you that are working in game design now are familiar with things like the Unity engine and Unreal engine, but that didn't exist at the time. This was the first real engine that allowed a level designer to make something very quickly and to be able to play it within a few minutes. That should play an anim there, actually. Did it do it? Did that play an anim there, or was it just that one screen?
No, it went through.
Ah, good.
Did it play?
I just talked for 2 minutes. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, along with the game, and this was giving you a really fantastic prompt there, along with the game, that engine was constantly evolving. It was getting better and better. So yes, we worked on Tomb Raider 2. We made adjustments to the engine, to Lara, and added vehicles, etc. And as the game progressed, the complexity of what we were creating was getting better. I think that kind of explains that the best way, doesn't it?
I was going to say that, so every company in the building created a different engine, so
Yeah.
we didn't
New
use the Tomb
programmers
Raider
wanted
engine.
to have a touch on the engine as well.
Well,
Yeah. So for the first engine that we created, the first room editor, was used by Tomb Raider 1 and 2, and then we give you the main program on 3, just they all used, didn't they?
Yeah, so we got the engine and adapted it. There was other teams in the building that also built their own game
Their own
engines.
version of it. So yeah, I'm just going to introduce Andy to
Oh,
who worked on, actually, he stuck it out for a lot longer than me. He did 3, 4 and 5, and that's it. So moving on again, we'll talk about, I believe it should be 2 now, and I've just put really a few screenshots of that just to show that it was kind of repeat the same format, and certainly by 2.2 we've got such a global interest in the game, there's so many investors, such a lot of money running on the game, that we were no longer allowed to like sit in a room on our own and just create a game, because there were shareholders involved, there was magazine publications, there was advertising, awful lot more to it, and we did really feel like that we were under a microscope in Tomb Raider 2. In addition to that, something that didn't help was Toby Gard and Paul left after Tomb Raider 1. So I think the execs kind of thought, well, were they the only sort of people we could rely on to get the game out? And these guys that are left, how much, did Toby do to make sure that everything was kept together? So we had quite a lot to prove, really. But within a few months, so they settled down and they knew what we were doing. So I'm going to sort of rewind a little bit onto whose idea was it to create Tomb Raider and Lara Croft. And it wasn't my idea, I wish it was, but it was Toby Gard's idea. He came to Core with a vision for a 3D game, and that was put on a back burner. Jeremy didn't really like or get the idea of it at the time, and I think he suggested Toby and Paul work on a game called BC Racers. But once that finished and Toby proved himself in the company and Paul, then you get that little bit more sort of encouragement to go off and do your own thing. And there was certainly a little bit of time for him to do that. So yeah, he started working on his concept for Tomb Raider and Lara Croft. So these are some of the very early drawings of Lara Croft, originally called Lara Cruise. And I did smile when I looked at this because I hadn't seen it in 20 years. This is from Toby's original concept sheets, and I just love the fact that he started the sentence with erstwhile. I think that's an excellent start description, isn't it? But Toby was fine-tuning Lara for the first 3 or 4 months of the game, and as you can see from this image here, even in that time, we've gone from quite a buxom lass to a slightly less buxom to okay, yeah, she looked quite athletic by the end of the list there, and you can see that she's more so the icon of what was the 90s Lara Croft. Anybody under the age of 18 leave now. Right, so getting back to what I did, because Lara Croft really wasn't my thing yet, that was going on, and I was aware of what Lara potentially could do within levels, but I was there to do the level design. The nice thing about level design at the time is, and really the whole project was how free it was, we could pretty much come up with any ideas, so it was easy to sit down in a meeting and just go, oh, where would we want to go in the world, where would we really want to visit? And we knew it was an exploration game, we could treasure, so all the obvious got thrown forward, you know, Egypt, the Aztecs. And we ran with that really and tried to format some semblance of a storyboard around her exploration. And I know that nowadays stories drive games, but at that time it was totally the other way. The game was the important thing, the story just bolted it together. So team meetings, we used to discuss all the various locations and traps. Once we'd nailed down some regular traps like pushing a block, spikes, arrows and all the rest of it, we could accommodate them throughout every level. But then we'd want level specifics, sort of a big end of game surprise or objective, if you like. And I'm going to show you, never been seen before, is Toby's schematic for level 1. And I looked at this and I thought to myself, you know, people often say, especially if they're writers, poets or songwriters, I designed it on the back of the flag packet and the book. So it's very much that sort of thing. It really was just to give me and Neil, the other level designer, an idea of a layout, very simply put together. And again, just trusting in us to get on with it and actually build the levels. This is the only time that Toby actually put some reference in the rooms of what you should do in the room, because once we'd nailed down all Lara's moves and her abilities, we could just add all those elements ourselves. So again, in the very beginning, and this didn't last long, I just sort of evolved that schematic that Toby'd done, put a bit more detail into it, talk about the possible route that Lara would take in the game. We could discuss new ideas as well as we were going on. It wasn't down to just a meeting before we started building the level. This was constant. We were in a room together, and then one of us would say, can we have Lara shimmying across a wall? Or can we have, I don't know, a bridge collapse? And all those ideas were valid, but we needed to keep the room, the whole game tight. We didn't have long to create it. We only had 12 months to create it. So we needed to narrow that down into the very, very basics of a playable game. And these are most of these ideas didn't go in, so they're the obvious ideas for rooms you can interact with. Again, an expanding bridge. Movable blocks in the shaft spaces became crumbling floors. The danger zone area, activator pads and walls moving in. We realised that the polygons were clipping when we were trying to bring rooms in, and it looked awful, and Lara was bouncing around.
Where did you get it? I was just going to ask Heather where you actually got the ideas from. Did you sort of translate 2D ideas from?
Sometimes 2D ideas, but I think a lot of it was very natural. It's kind of like, you've got to remember, like Toby was already big into the whole Indiana Jones concept, which was massive at the time of what was going on in Indiana Jones, and then Prince of Persia game. So combine the two.
Yeah, we
all the elements were there really. Pushing blocks was a slightly odd one. I think pushing blocks was down to the fact that we wanted to change floor heights and activate switches in a different way. So we dumped the idea of having raising floors and moved towards a block that just allowed Lara to get to the next exit route or to activate a trigger point. By Tomb 2, so you'll see we've moved on now from cigarette packet designs, because Coming out of Tomb Raider 1, we were under an enormous amount of pressure to release Tomb Raider 2 by the following Christmas. So again, a 12-month period. So we didn't have any time off after Tomb Raider 1. We went straight back into doing Tomb Raider 2. And again, that was because of the pressure put on us by, not solely by bosses, but we knew the importance of the investments made again by shareholders in IDOS. And we were at a stage then where, rather than being left on our own, we got a lot of visitors to the room, so we had to do something that looked a little bit more visual rather than just explaining to Jeremy, oh, I'm going to do Venom. That didn't work anymore. We just had to have something there that executives types understood what we were getting at. So I started plotting out just really simple with some just crayons, just in the morning, just throw a quick crayon sketch together. It was in my head, but I had to make somebody else understand it. For instance, this bit here, you were always up against what you could do in the game. So a great idea of, oh yeah, Lara's going to jump out of a window and grab a shutter and it's all going to collapse and she's going to drop down into the next window and she's going to grab a shutter. Okay, so are we going to do specific animations for that? No, we haven't got time for that. So what we're going to do instead is we'll use what we've got already, and that is the fact we know Lara can slide and she can grab. So we'll move that idea onto something that's simplified and have a canopy jump. That's kind of everything that we did in Tomb Raider was, much like Julia said, was taking the technology or what we've got at hand and just pushing that little bit further with it. So now I'm actually going to show you I'm kind of at the end of what I wanted to talk to you about really, and that was just to give you a snippet of what it was like to work on those early games. And at the end of this, I've just got a few pieces. One of these is a really bad bit of footage actually. It's from a very early documentary, so it's literally ripped off YouTube. And it's just showing me using the room editor. But as I say, stick with it. I don't know if you'll really see what I'm doing, but I'll certainly give it a go, shall I, Andy?
Andy's got a different voice in this.
Yeah, oh yes, I might be more of a Brummie in this. I've moved since to Utoptata, so I'm halfway between a Brummie and a Derbyshire girl.
Just press play.
I think you can click the image at the picture next. Well, there you go, so yeah.
A second tool creates game levels. Here we're watching level designer Heather Gibson build a room with a series of mouse clicks.
This isn't speeded up,
And
by
then
the
if you
way.
look on this side of the motor, I've got a selection of textures that
And
I
it was
can
24
use
years
on this map.
ago.
You can then go on to applying the textures to these areas. So it's just a matter
I
of
was very tired as well. So.
textures onto the faces that are displayed within the room editor. You can apply a light to the room, change the ambience of that room, change the range and strength of the light to get that nice moody atmosphere that we've got on most of the levels. I can actually have a look at this room now by going to preview and fly around and see how it looks. And also we can trigger all the baddies